I'm Mindy Peterson, and this is Enhance Life with Music, where we explore the ways music makes our lives better and spotlight the resources you can use to enhance your life with music. I'm thrilled to welcome return guest today. Dr. Catherine Palmer is a master arts educator. I first met her in December 2020 when she was curator of education at Phoenix's Musical Instrument Museum. This museum is absolutely incredible, and I was blown away by the museum experience and also by Dr. Palmer and her level of knowledge and also the innovative programming that she was implementing. This was December of 2020, so we all know what was happening then, and I was just amazed by the innovative programming and by how quickly Dr. Palmer was able to really pivot with the pandemic and make so many of those programming options available online. So it was really, really impactful for me. I'll put a link in the show notes to our conversation from MIM, the Musical Instrument Museum. Fast forward to today, Dr. Palmer is now the Senior Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum in Nashville. I had the chance to reconnect with her recently and experience the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. In addition to being a nonprofit leader, museum professional, and passionate arts educator, Dr. Palmer is an ethnomusicologist and a clarinetist. Welcome back to Enhance Life with Music, Katie.
Hi, Mindy. Thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to talk with you again.
So fun to reconnect with you. One thing that I realized after my 2020 visit to MIM is that not all museums are these static experiences where you can visit and check the box. That's kind of what I tend to think of museums as. Mm-hmm. And after touring MIM with you and kind of strolling through it afterward at my own leisure, which I could spend forever there, it was amazing. It really opened my eyes to the fact that there are these amazing museums like MIM and the Country Music Hall of Fame that are both incredible in-person experiences and also education and outreach hubs that reach beyond their on-site visitors. So I'm really excited to introduce my audience to this resource, both because I hope they'll come and visit. It is an incredible in-person experience, but also want to introduce them to some of the programming and resources that are available, whether they're in-person visiting, whether they're in the greater Nashville area or beyond. So I want to talk about both of these aspects, the in-person experience and beyond. When I was talking about that static experience that I thought of museums as being, I realized all of these resources that some of these museums offer beyond the in-person experience, but also that they are constantly evolving institutions. They're constantly growing. They're not the static one and done experience. So we're going to talk about both of those aspects. First of all, one part of your role at the museum is managing the Taylor Swift Education Center. Taylor Swift has been all over the news, breaking records for at least the last couple of years. Her Eras tour just wrapped up recently as we're recording this conversation. Taylor's musical origins were in country music, and she made a generous gift that allowed this education center to open in 2014 as part of the museum's expansion. Tell us a little bit about the Taylor Swift Education Center and what it offers.
Yeah, the Taylor Swift Education Center is such a fun and interactive space, and we're so lucky to have Taylor Swift's engagement and, for her to recognize the significance of education and how much of an impact she can make in that area. So the Taylor Swift Education Center is housed inside the museum, and it's a 2-story, 7,500 square foot facility that includes things like classrooms, interactive distance learning labs, interpretive gallery pieces, and gallery interactives as well as some of Taylor Swift artifacts that are on display. Which, like you said, museums are ever changing and ever evolving, and so those do change and evolve as we go through time.
Yeah. So these are really cool. I mean, I can't claim to be a Swiftie or anywhere close to a Swiftie, but it was still really fun to see some of the clothing and instruments from her personal collection that were used for significant events, whether it was concerts and tours or album covers, things like
Mhm.
that. And that is, as you mentioned, something that's constantly changing and rotating.
Yeah, and I'll say even if you're not a self-described Swiftie, her career has now spanned decades, and the music she makes is quite diverse. And so I say this about country music too, is that you might surprise yourself with something that you didn't think you would like that catches your ear, and you go, oh, I actually really do kind of dig these sounds.
Oh, totally. Well, she's spanned genres and she's also spanned not only the music community and industry, but business. I mean, she's an incredible
Mhm.
businesswoman. She's obviously gotten involved in sports in terms of her high profile relationship with Kelsey and, really brought a lot of overlap to the sports and music community. So yeah, she's very a unique individual. And it's always so cool to see people who have that kind of a platform use
Mhm.
it for good. And so I love that she's contributing and giving back in this way. Other stuff that you want us to know about the Education Center.
Other things include programming. So, whether people are in Nashville or coming through Nashville, most weekends we activate the classroom spaces with music, art, or dance programming. Come in and try something out. It's an opportunity to explore, discover, and create with us in person. It's also a space where you can pick up interactives at any time, interpretive materials, making sure that we have things to help make the galleries more accessible to youth audiences. So things like interpretive coloring pages or scavenger hunts that end with a prize you can collect at the end. There's something for everyone, I think.
Oh, totally. I know there was friendship bracelet making going
Hmm.
on in one of those spaces when I was there visiting. There's a video conference lab, there's an interactive gallery. So lots of exciting things for anywhere from toddlers and then older kids, but also schools. It's a learning environment for all ages for sure. And that scavenger hunt that you mentioned, that I loved that because personally, I had kids who were not quite as into the museum experience as I
Hmm.
was. And so I loved taking them there. They weren't always super enthusiastic about going. And these kinds of scavenger hunts totally make it fun for everybody. And it really helps kids really experience all aspects of the museum. And like you said, it's not just for that particular space in the museum, the education center, but it's for various galleries to kind of help them really give them something to focus on and look for and make it a fun kind of
Hmm.
interactive experience. I think the
We
coloring, oh,
absolutely
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we absolutely want to make sure that we provide opportunities for guests of all ages, whether that's young children or older adults that are coming through the space to find their own connections with country music and the content of the museum. And so those interactive pieces that we were just talking about, the scavenger hunts, really are a great way for us to realize that and to bring it to life.
Sure. And the scavenger hunt, again, it just kind of blows my mind. All of the things that is incorporated into that. There's a QR code to access kid-friendly playlists of LA country rock music. And that kind of goes along with that particular gallery that's related to that. The coloring pages that you mentioned, I think are downloadable for anybody.
Hmm.
There's explorer kits for kids with sensory sensitivities. So I
Hmm.
know attention parents with kids with sensory sensitivities, a lot of times you may tend to steer clear of these types of environments, but this is
Hmm.
a friendly place for your kiddos too.
Absolutely. And museums and we at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum in particular have worked really hard to make sure that our spaces are inclusive and they're accessible.
Yeah. So this education center has hands-on workshops, there's instrument workshops,
Mhm.
songwriting, dancing, art, including sewing and costume design. You have programs for preschoolers all the way up to older kids. So really exciting things going on there. Talk to us a little bit about the programming that you have for schools, which goes pre-K through college. I work in my day job quite a bit with music faculty, whether it's K through 12 or college. And I was really excited about some of the resources that you have available for schools and teachers. So tell us about some of those.
In addition to offering traditional field trips where students can come in, whether they're local students or national or international students, we also have materials that are available online via our teacher resource portal. And there you'll find materials that have strong curriculum connections to English language arts, social emotional learning skills, math, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are STEM and STEAM categories. So all of these curriculum-driven materials are housed on this one resource, the Teacher Resource Portal, which is free for educators to access. They just have to log in and sign up with us. And those are, like the museum, ever evolving and ever changing. And so we're constantly updating and putting new resources on there to help bring country music history to the classroom wherever people are.
That's really exciting. I vividly remember the exhibit at MIM over in Phoenix about the STEAM, where it really incorporated the science, technology, engineering aspects of sound and instruments and how different instruments create different sounds and the different timbres and things like that. And this teacher portal, I love how it's also incorporating some of those STEAM concepts, but then also, like you mentioned, the SEL, the social emotional learning, and sort of blending that with English arts. It teaches songwriting and incorporates some of those other holistic aspects, educational aspects in the songwriting aspect too. This portal's available to homeschool teachers as well, right?
Yeah, educators of any and all varieties, really.
Okay. Yeah. So really exciting, interesting resources there. I think you have some field trip information on there too, if people are close enough to make in-person field trips. Is that right?
Absolutely. Everything's available on countrymusichallofame.org. You can find the teacher resource portal there, but you can also find our list of field trip offerings, which include traditional museum gallery tours and classroom experiences where we do workshops together, whether it's an art design workshop or a listening technology over time where we're discovering how technology has changed and developed. There's our STEAM components through Words and Music, which is our flagship educational program. That was the songwriting portion that you were mentioning previously.
Yeah. Tell us just a little bit more about that, the Words and Music program.
It's been around since 1979, so we've served over 180,000 participants over the years through songwriting education. And we're really teaching students through English language arts the ways that they can craft their own song, which is hitting our social emotional learning, our SEL skills, but also helping to develop things like rhyme scheme and metaphor understanding. And so as the students craft their own original song lyrics, we then pair their classroom with a Nashville-based songwriter who helps to bring those songs to life. And so during a field trip on site with us, those songs come to life for the students with the Nashville songwriter in person, but you can also engage in the programming virtually. And so we'll log on with you via Zoom and have a nice about hour-long presentation of songs that the children have put together and with some inspiration and co-writing from local Nashville songwriters.
Wow. That's very cool. And sort of going along with that, I know during our conversation when we were together, we were talking about the fact that the museum partners with Creative Vets in sort of a similar way. Creative Vets is an incredible organization for veterans. It serves veterans. They were featured on quite an early podcast episode of this show. And it was one of those interviews that was very impactful for me. I'll never forget, just because Richard Casper, who founded and created this organization, had such a powerful story. I can put a link in the show notes. But for that, with that organization, there's sort of a similar situation where veterans will work with the Nashville songwriters to write their own song. And you partner somehow with them, with the Creative Vets program?
We do. We provide words and music opportunities for the Creative Vets. And, we have such a talented and gifted team here. And so we have on-staff songwriters that will log on with Creative Vets and provide guidance and help bring their song to life together.
That's amazing. One thing you mentioned during our visit is that country music history is American history. And I loved that phrase, that sentence, because it's so true. I remember a friend of mine watched the Ken Burns documentary about country music.
Great. Yeah.
Oh, I know. So she was like, Mindy, you should really watch this. And I was like, I'm not really a big country music person. And she's like, I don't care. You love music and you love history. So you're going to love this documentary. She's like, I own it. Just watch it. You're going to thank me. And so I did. And I absolutely loved it. And I wasn't aware until watching that how much influence country music had on other genres. And just like that sentence that you said about country music history is American history. There was so much history involved in that country music documentary that it was really intriguing. Before we leave this whole teacher educator portal topic, just talk a little bit more about that fact that country music history is American history, because I think that's a concept that a lot of teachers are really going to love, especially when they think about this holistic aspect of the resources that you offer to them on the portal.
You know, it's one of the things I really love about arts integrated music education and using music as a lens to teach through, because you really can hit more than what many would sort of perceive as just music-based standards, right? We're doing so much more. I mentioned, of course, STEAM and STEM. I mentioned SEL. I mentioned ELA, but I didn't say social studies. And social studies is such a big part of the content. And whether or not you're an educator and you're looking for arts integrated approaches in your teaching, or if you're just a general visitor that's just deeply interested in how this country evolved and changed over time, you know, the country music story certainly has much to offer and much to give. Our Sing Me Back Home exhibit, which is our permanent exhibition, traces country music history from the pre-commercial early roots all the way through contemporary and common day. And there's no point in time where music doesn't intersect and overlap with everything that's happening socially, culturally, politically in this country. And those things all come to life through music. And country music as such a uniquely American art form is really uniquely poised to tell that story of American history in a way that, you know, many may not initially think of us as a history museum, but we very much are.
Yeah, I love how you express that music really helps that history come to life through the music. One of my favorite places to turn for instant gratification and a dopamine hit is browsing digital sheet music at sheetmusicdirect.com. This online store is powered by music publisher Hal Leonard, and it has over 1 million arrangements that you can view, listen to, and download. No need to buy an entire book for that one song you love. Create your own library from selections representing all levels, instruments, genres, and holidays. Prices start at 99 cents, and you can both print your purchases and access them on any device, which is really handy for those of us who travel or are trying to go paperless. I would say this is my guilty pleasure, but it's actually a guilt-free pleasure. There are so many brain benefits to reading music, making music, and experiencing new music. Instead of subscribing to another streaming platform, subscribe to Sheet Music Direct to treat yourself and your kids to real brain food and a guilt-free pleasure. Access the latest hits and yesterday's classics at sheetmusicdirect.com. When I was visiting the museum, I'm just going to tell you some of my favorites that I loved. And I'm not a huge car person, but you have a couple cars at the museum that are absolutely mind-blowing. And they're works of art in themselves. There's the Webb Pierce car that has revolver hand. I think they're revolver. I don't know much about guns either, but they're is it revolver door handles?
Yeah,
okay.
And a saddle in the middle. It was designed by Nudie Cohn, and so it is a stylistic, iconic piece unto its own.
For sure. Yeah, that center console, like you said, is a saddle. There's horns on the front of the car. All of the interior is the stamped leather interior. It's absolutely incredible. And then the other car that was really mind-blowing and so fun to see was Elvis Presley's car. It's a 1960 Cadillac that was retrofitted with a gold-plated TV, a record player, a phone, and then the coating, the paint coating
Yeah.
on it was a diamond dust pearl coating made from crushed diamonds and fish scales.
It is, it has such a unique shine to it for that reason, which I'm sure is why Elvis liked it and picked it.
Yes, it's incredible. I mean, I just had so much fun looking at it, and every time, like every inch of it that you look at, you see something different because there's so much there.
It's almost like a time capsule, right?
Yeah,
Going back.
yeah. And had a phone in it when that was not a thing.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned the nudie suits. Either I must have heard that term in the Ken Burns documentary, I'm
Mhm.
sure, but I must have forgotten it because when you said it, I was kind of like, nudie suit. Like, and then when you explained what it was, I was like, okay, that was not the first thought that came to my mind when you said that, but it was so fun learning
Yes,
about
and for your
these.
listeners,
Yes,
a
yes,
nudie
go ahead and
suit is
explain that.
a nudie suit is are suits that have been made by the tailor Nudie Cohn, who really sort of created some of the imagery associated with artists and did such a stylistic job that it has transcended time and generations. And the idea of sort of like a blinged out suit goes back to these Nudie Cohn suits.
Yes, and you have so many of them on display. The cosmic cowboy nudie suits were amazing. One of them, there's a picture of Elton John wearing it. It's really
Mhm.
amazing to see these extravagant suits. So super cool. Those were some of my favorites. It's really cool too, just the architectural nods to Tennessee that are and to
Mhm.
music that are part of the architectural design of the building. Some of the wood that's used, the piano keys design of the building, both inside and
Mhm.
outside, is really cool. The WSM Tower replica that's included in there, that's sort of a tribute to that radio station really putting Nashville on the map. So
Mhm.
lots of amazing things. Anything else that you want listeners to know in the time that we have here about some of the programming that the museum offers, or something that you really want them to know about the in-person experience before I ask you about the Fred Rogers Gretsch Fellowship that you did?
Yeah, I think that at the museum there's something for everybody. You mentioned some of your favorite items, and I think what's really um, fun and interesting about artifacts and the objects that are on display is that they each have their own little life and little story, and most people can find something that resonates with them, through the early pre-commercial roots, like I mentioned, all the way through common day. I often encourage people when they come in to find something familiar and then to find something new,
Mm.
so that we're building from a place of familiarity into a place of unknown. And that's how relationships start.
Love that.
Mhm.
The music community is definitely one that's a connecting community, and music itself has been called social glue. And this museum is definitely really contributing to that connection between people, between music and history, and so many other things. Well, since we first met in 2020, you were awarded the Gretsch Fellow in Children's Music at the Fred
Mhm.
Rogers Institute. We're going to switch gears just a little bit here because you
Sure.
told me about this white paper that resulted from your time there. And when I had a chance to read it, I just absolutely loved it and just wanted to save a couple
Mhm.
minutes for you to tell listeners about this, because I know many of them will want to read it too, especially some of the educators or people who work with young kids, maybe parents who have young kids. When you had this fellowship, you investigated the impact of music making and listening on empathy and cultural awareness. You wrote this
Mhm.
white paper that I mentioned, and I just would love for you to tell listeners about the topic that you chose to research and write about.
Thanks so much for taking the time to read the paper. 2021, I accepted the fellowship position at the Fred Rogers Institute, which is housed at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And I have to say that, I grew up watching Fred Rogers, so I already had a special place in my heart for what he represented, both through his television show, right, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and through his speaking engagements and writings during that time. What I was not expecting was to really walk away with an even deeper understanding of just how much music influenced him. I knew he was a musician. He went to Rollins College, majored in music, and penned a substantial number of songs and operas. And, you hear that and see that on the show. But music really did influence the ways through which he moved through the world and through which he put together the television show. And so when I went into the fellowship, I really wanted to think about, Fred was the best neighbor I think all of us knew sort of growing up. And it was multi-generational because he was on TV for over 30 years. And I wanted to think about empathy. And he was so kind in all of his approach and so accepting on television and the way that he portrayed. And I just thought, music played such an important role in the show. Where was the intersections between the music he was making, the music that we were listening to, so music making and listening, and empathy and how he approached that. I dug into the archives and really enjoyed getting to know treasure trove that is housed there at the Fred Rogers Institute, and his writings and his editing in particular. He often would reference the phrase, the Quaker saying, attitudes are caught, not taught. And when it came to music, he would occasionally edit that to say music and the attitude of music, right? As with most things, music, the attitude is caught much more than taught. And so modeling these positive associations with music making and listening to help watchers build their own relationship with music. But, as you dug into the archive, do you realize it really wasn't about the music at all? And that, music is about so much more than just the sonic happenings that surround us. And really, at the end of the day, going back to that, the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, the songwriting that happens and the social emotional learning and how we come to process all that is happening around us through artistic art forms, including music, is really at the root of it. And so I sort of have this hypothesis, and I believe this very much, that we can help young children by diversifying their soundscape. So if what you see is a landscape, what you hear is a soundscape, by diversifying soundscapes early on and making diverse sounds more familiar in early ages, that I think that we have a little bit, more open of a heart, and certainly more open-earedness for diverse sounds. And I think that helps us to feel better moving through the world with diversity.
Love that. Well, one of the quotes that you had in the white paper that I loved and just kind of pulled out here, you said, music is an interdisciplinary tool to foster knowing and understanding of the world. It helps to build inter and intrapersonal relationships. It is the soundscape to growing and learning. And that sort of speaks to some of the other things that we talked about earlier in this conversation about music as a social glue and a connector, and also how it can sort of exponentially aid education, whether it's SEL or history or things like that. And some of the things also that you mentioned, Fred Rogers said, how attitudes are caught much more than taught when you implement music into them as well. It was interesting to me to read a quote that you had from him in that white paper where he said, "It seems that music has always been at the root of who I am and what I do. Some people might be surprised to know that first and foremost, I consider myself a musician." And as you mentioned, he penned over 200 songs and 13 children's operas for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which you mentioned in the paper. So really, really incredible. I'll for sure include a link in the show notes to that white paper so that parents and educators can read that. You have some recommendations at the end of that for diversifying music making and listening. So very informative and practical white paper.
Thanks, Mindy. I appreciate it.
Yeah. One other quote of yours that I want to mention as we close here is from your website. On your website, you said, arts education is about relationship building. It gives people the tools to better understand themselves, one another, and the world around them. And you certainly, I can speak from experience, have done that with your work, continue to do that with your work. And both of the museums you've been a part of, MIM and now Country Music Hall of Fame, are certainly doing this as well. So highly recommend the experience to listeners, both for an in-person visit and then also to access some of the resources that the museum makes available, whether you're there in person or you're beaming in remote and taking advantage of some of those resources. Anything else you want to mention before I have you close things out with a coda here at the end?
No, I want to thank you for the time and for the conversation. It's always interesting to chat with you, and thanks for all of the good work you do and sharing how important music making is in our collective lives.
My pleasure. Thank you. Well, Katie, as you know, I ask all my guests to close out our conversation with a musical ending, a coda, by sharing a song or story about a moment that music enhanced your life. Do you have a song or story that you can share with us in closing today?
Absolutely. In speaking and thinking about Fred Rogers, there was an appearance by Ella Jenkins. She made many appearances on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but the one that always resonates with me and sticks with me is when she visited and she did a children's song, Head and Shoulders. And I think this is particularly timely because Ella just passed recently. And so it's been sitting with me, both her great influence and, of course, Fred's great influence and how we carry this work together. But on the show, in this episode, she is teaching Fred Head and Shoulders. And usually when we think Head and Shoulders, a lot of people think head, shoulders, knees, and toes, right?
Yeah.
She's doing a different version. She's doing Head and Shoulders, baby, 1, 2, 3. And so Fred is caught just a little off guard and can't keep up. And so I don't know if you've watched this clip yet, but it is worth checking out. And he just sort of loses his way and laughs through it. And the story I heard was that, this was recorded and they watched it back. The producers watched it back and everyone laughed and said, okay, let's do it again. And Fred said, no, it's perfect just the way it is. And he really modeled trying, but just not quite hitting the mark, and in some ways modeled failure, and but fun. And it's something that I like to carry with me, certainly with Ella's passing and both of their legacies coming to life.
Love that. And yes, you're so right. I mean, it's so important for the grownups and the adults to model self-compassion and humor and being able to laugh at ourselves and model, like you said, failure. And I just messed up and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. It's a good lesson for adults too.
It is. Absolutely. Thank you so much to Dr. Palmer for joining us today and sharing that story. You can view this scene with Ella Jenkins with a link in the episode notes. You'll also find links in the episode notes to Katie's white paper, pictures of my visit with Katie at the museum, a transcript of this episode, and all other links from our conversation. You can always connect with me on email, mindy@mpetersonmusic.com, Facebook, Instagram, X, or LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing the show. Until next time, may your life be enhanced with music.